In the previous episode, the king was locked in the corner in front of the pawn. This time, we'll have a look how the king escapes from the dungeon. Let's get into it. This time, let's have a look at the positions when we have the opportunity to see when the king from the attacking side is trying to escape from the dungeon. If it is possible, then the opportunity to promote the pawn is pretty much a very simple idea to convert. Let's get into it. Now, the first position, as we can see, is right here. First of all, the king can escape from the dungeon, and the second point is the defending side is not having these squares covered. Therefore, at this moment, the task for the winning side is pretty simple. First, we are getting outside. Of course, the threat is pretty simple to promote the pawn, as the rook will be protecting the pawn, therefore a pretty easy win. And now, how black can stop this idea? The only way to stop this idea, or at least to try to do so, is to throw some of the checks. And now, at this moment, we are throwing the check. Take notice, if the king gets back, we are just going the same or even better, cutting off the square not to allow the king to escape. But the king can try to get outside, and again, the threat is to promote, because after the king step back, let's say this way, the pawn will be promoted and the rook will be protecting the new promoted queen. And now, after the check, now we are going here. Take notice, we are going down with the idea of going with the first rank not to be harassed by the rook, but at the same time, we must protect the pawn. If we just played king b5 and now we are trying to go into the first rank, the rook will be capturing the pawn and then the game ends in a draw. And that's why the king must go into the b6 square. After throwing the check, now as you probably can see, we can go right here or even right there. It's up to you. The goal is to not to be harassed by the black rook, therefore the position is pretty simple, winning. After stepping back, again, the threat is to promote. After the rook goes here, we promote, capture, capture, game over. Of course, if the rook would be harassing the king, for example, after this type of stuff, we are just going with the king right here. And now, after that, we are going closer and closer. And now, at this point, the rook is being attacked, the threat to promote, therefore, rook going here. And after this series of moves, probably you can understand that it's pretty simple, winning. And that's why, at this position, the idea was to get outside of this dungeon, at the same time going up to the square into the second rank, not to be harassed by the rook. Now, another position. This time, we have strengthened the position as the defending side, because we cut off the escape square for the king. And now, how white is winning. White is making the idea that previously was not working, because the king was either on c8 or c7, and having the squares for the escaping from the dungeon for the king covered. This time, it doesn't. And now, at this moment, rook is attacking the rook, therefore the rook must step back. After stepping back, again, the same idea as previously. We are escaping from the dungeon, and at the same time, the pawn and the rook are onto the diagonal. And at this moment, let's have a look how it is done. It's pretty simple, actually. After the king step back, of course, the threat is to promote the pawn. Therefore, black rook is harassing the king. Now, take notice, the king cannot get through the c-file as yet. If the king comes back to the corner, we just repeat having the control of the promoting square by the rook. Therefore, the king must go the other way. Therefore, these moves are illegal, and therefore we have only two moves to go. Either king e6, king a6. After king a6, rook is attacking the king, and through the x-ray is attacking the pawn. Take notice, the pawn is not protected. That's why the king must have the contact with the pawn. Otherwise, if the king step back here, not having the contact, we capture the pawn and the game ends in a draw. Be careful not to lose the pawn. And now, at this moment, the contact is established with the king and with the pawn, and now we'll be going down with the idea of the falling leaf. And now, at this moment, as you can see, even if they promote the pawn into the queen, rook captures, we just recapture, winning. Of course, if they try to harass us with the rook check, we are going with the falling leaf idea, FLY. Remember, it may be a little bit important in the next type of positions. Fly as the flying leaf idea. And now, at this moment, as you can see, again, the rook is forced to step back because it cannot harass the king any longer, and that's why the position is simply winning. Another position. Previously, the king was a little bit farther away from the squares b8 and b7. This time, the king is covering together with the rook the square b7. And now, if the king would be standing on the c7 square, then the game would be an easy draw. And now, at this moment, white makes the move and win. How it is the winning idea? Rook throw the check. And now, there are 5 moves to make. If you put any of the moves by the king into the b file, then the game ends immediately, because of course it's a blunder due to the x-ray. Therefore, we cannot get into the b file. We can go into one of the squares on the d file. And now, if you are going into d7, at the same time we are attacking the rook, but now at this moment again, rook is attacking the rook, the king is not into one of the squares c8, c7 in order not to allow the king to escape, and now at this moment the position is winning for white. And now at this moment this position that will be having the pawn and the rook right here will be calling SPC. SPC will be the acronym from the self-promo construction. And now I would like to point out one more important point. For example, if this position, if white tries to go a little bit too fast, if they played rook b8 immediately, they will just spoil the advantage. Now, black has 2 ways of defending, either getting the rook into the a1 or any squares on the first rank except the square c1 due to the fork. Therefore, at this moment, they can choose whatever way they like. Let's start with the rook h1. And now, at this moment, the king cannot escape via the b7 square, the rook is covering b8, therefore rook must step back in order to help the king to escape. After throwing the check, now the only move not to lose. And now, very important moment. The king is attacking the rook, and now, at this moment, if the king step back with the idea of the queen, we are just throwing the check. Now the king has only legal move, and after the capture, take notice, black cut off all of the squares for the king, and the king with the pawn do not have any legal moves, therefore a stalemate. Take notice that at this moment, after king d7, the king plays b8, but if they played, for example, rook c2, now with this idea either here or there, we are just making the rook b1 cutting off the king escape square, and now if the rook throws the check, we are going king c7, king c8, and now we know this is a pretty simple drawing idea. Now, what happens after this one if the rook goes into the other side, into the a1? This one draws as well. After the rooks throw the check right here, we can go king d7, repeating the position. After the rook goes right there, with the idea of allowing the king to escape from the dungeon and protect the pawn to be promoted, now the king gets c7, not allowing the king to escape. As I just mentioned in the previous episode, if you understand the previous ideas, this one would be pretty simple. And now, after throwing the check, the only move that makes the position drawing is this one. If you get any other one, either b6, either d6 or d8, it's lost. Therefore, king d7, the only one. Now, at this moment, as you can see, the king is cut off. The king cannot get into c7, c8, but take notice the king cannot escape from the dungeon because it will be harassed by the rook. Let's have a look. After king b7, of course with the threat of promotion, we are attacking the king. And again, the king cannot stay in any of the squares along the b and c files. The king can only get into the dungeon or trying to escape via the a6 square. After king a6, again, throwing the check, otherwise white wins immediately due to the promotion. Now, if the king gets here, we are making the repetition. And now, if the king gets into the square b5, of course, we are just winning the pawn and the game ends in a draw. Therefore, the king needs to slide down, but at the same time must have the contact with the pawn as at the previous position I explained. Now, throwing the check again, and now what's going on? Now, the king cannot get into these 2 squares, and now after the king gets into the a5, again, we are throwing the check. After throwing the check, the king cannot get into one of the squares on the b file, b5 and b4, because the pawn will be lost. That's why they must maintain the contact with the pawn again. And now, again, if the king tries to get the other way, with the idea of having the rook onto the a file and then promote the pawn. We do not allow for that, attacking the pawn immediately. And now you cannot protect it with the rook, you cannot push it, therefore you must repeat the position. And now at this moment there is the repetition of the position. You can say threefold repetition, and the position is drawn due to this mechanism. It's very important to remember it. Okay, I hope now you get the point. At this position, what happens if the position is played out correctly? Rook c8 check, and now self-winning mechanisms, or you can say self-promo construction, or if you play incorrectly, rook b8, and you can draw either with any of the moves on the first rank, rook a1, d1, e1, f1, g1, h1. I explained rook a1 and rook h1. The other ones are the same ideas as well. And another position. This time the king has a little bit different position, and now the idea is the same. Rook b8 immediately. Why? Because now the king is not neither on the square c7 or c8, therefore the black king doesn't hold the position for the escaping squares for the king, therefore we are attacking the rook immediately, and now we have so-called self-promo construction, SPC. The pawn a7, rook b8 creates such position. And now the rook is stepping back, otherwise it's going to be captured, and now the king escapes. And now at this moment, as you can see, the king is going to be able to escape either this way, either this way. Therefore, there are two paths for escaping from this dungeon. Of course, the idea is to make the promotion immediately. Therefore, at this moment, black needs to stop it. They just throw the check. If they get into the dungeon, we just get behind the pawn, as simple as that. Now, they get into the c8 square, trying to escape the other way, for example here, otherwise they will not able to do so. Let's check it out why. After king a6, there is no safe escape route. Why? Because at this moment, after throwing the check, as previously, if the king gets into the b5 square, we simply capture the pawn as it is not protected. Therefore, the king needs to slide down the board, but at the same time having the contact with the pawn. And now, after throwing the check, now, as you probably remember the previous position, the king doesn't have any moves except these two on the a file, therefore the king must go, and again, the king cannot slide down right here because the pawn is not protected. After king b5, we just repeat the position, the game ends in a draw. And that's why the king cannot go down the board due to the opportunity for repetition of the position and harassment by our rook. And that's why the king must go the other way. And now, as you can see, right now, the king tries to step back the other way. Of course, the promotion threat, you need to react, therefore throwing the check. And now, after the king step back, again, promoting idea is on the line, therefore black must react quickly. And now they have three possible ideas to implement. Either rook h1, either rook g1, either rook f1, all of the ones with the threats of checkmate on the back rank. And therefore, at this moment, if white would be a little bit too hasty, if they rush, if they promote the queen after rook h1, we just checkmate the king. Therefore, be careful, do not rush. And now, after rook h1, if you just step back the left side, we just make the same position, and you are forced into getting the same position again. And now, after that, white makes the key move, throwing the check, not allowing the checkmate, because the black king must stay on the 6th rank. If it is not staying on the 6th rank, checkmate would not be possible by black. And now there are three moves. If the king gets as far as possible, the idea is pretty simple. The rook is not allowing the defending side rook to cover the promoting square, and after throwing some checks, the king escapes, and at this moment, if you just exchange the rooks, the king is too far away to stop the pawn, and the pawn promotes. Therefore, the first idea is pretty simple. If the king gets into e5 very far away, it doesn't help. What happens if the king gets to d5, you may ask. At this moment, immediately, you must notice that after the pawn promotion, the queen is skewering the king and the rook on the same diagonal, therefore we are just winning the rook. If you are a little bit more fancy, if you'd like to get the pre-moves, you can make a checkmate in 5 by the ladder mate. How it is done? Pretty simple. Throwing the check, 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 and mate. Therefore, a little bit fancier. If you do not want to capture the rook, you would like to flex a little bit. And that's why As we just already established, neither the king e5 or king d5 is good enough, and now the last resort, trying to get into the square c5, because we are attacking the rook at the same time. And now what's going on? At this position, there are 4 moves that makes the position winning. Any other move than the ones that highlighted by the red squares does not make the position won any longer. And now let's have a look what happens if you just throw the check. This is the easiest way to understand this position and to remember. And now at this moment you probably can pretty quickly recognize it. After the king captures, as a blunder, we have this idea as previously. The skewer on the diagonal with the pawn promotion, and after the king step back, we capture the rook and winning easily. Therefore, at this moment, the rook is not possible to be captured as the new queen just make the skewer. And what then? You can go either left or right. Of course, if you are just stepping down, do not have the contact with the rook, you can make the task for the attacking side a way easier. And after the king step back right here, we are going here. The rook is making the opportunity for the pawn not to be harassed by the rook from the a file. And now the idea is to step back the same way as previously. After throwing the check, we step back, we step back, we step back, and after the exchange, the pawn promotes. As simple as that. And therefore, at this moment, I hope you understand it, that there are some ideas that must be implemented, but if you understand them step by step, if you can merge them, I believe you can win such position without too much difficulty. Take notice, it requires some practice. In this episode, we learned the following: how to escape from the dungeon, how to build self-promo construction, how to escape with the falling leaf idea, and when the rook sack is necessary to push back and decoy the king, in order to promote the pawn. I hope you enjoy it. Thanks for watching and see ya next time.